I am thrilled to be here this evening. I'm representing Family Equality Council. I work on the development side for the organization. We are a nonprofit organization that advocates for the lived and legal equality for LGBTQ families nationwide. And we have a program within our department that is called the Outspoken Generations program. It features children of LGBTQ parents and highlights their families. These members of our program are a huge part of our work that we do nationwide. When our policy department files amicus briefs in the Supreme Court, for example, their voices are a huge part of that work. They're also a huge part of our media campaigns and being social media, television, film. So I'm so privileged to be here tonight, and I'm not going to be doing barely any talking because I want to hear from these amazing people here up on the stage. So I'm just going to start to my left and let everyone introduce themselves and say a little bit about their family. And then I have some questions for the panelists, and then we'd really like to open up to you, our audience, and take your questions as well. So thank you so much for being here with us, and I'll let Lindsay take it away.
Hi. Oh, it's on. Hi, my name is Lindsay Steinert. I am 25 years old, and I have two gay dads who have been together for 40 years. I'm the oldest of 5 kids, and there are 2 sets of twins in my family. I'm not one of them, but my brothers who are 24, and my little brother and sister who are 15, and there's 2 surrogates, and I'm blood related to everyone in my family except one of my dads. Usually I have a diagram, it's very confusing, but that's, yeah, 2 surrogates, 2 gay dads.
Hi, my name is Eleanor. I'm Ron's daughter. He was just speaking. So I have 2 dads and a twin brother. I'm 16 years old and we live here in New York City.
My name's Gina Zartangwe. I'm 16 years old. I'm from Boston. I have 2 dads and a little brother who's 15. I also have a diagram, much like Lindsay, because I'm related to both of my dads. So one of my dads is my biological father, and then my egg donor is what now is my aunt, and I was actually carried by a gestational carrier. So there were 3 people involved in my conception and birth.
I am Olivia. I am from Boston. I have 4 dads, a brother, and 2 male dogs.
Great, thank you. So I'm just going to go ahead with questions, and just feel free to pop in. We won't go in any specific order. So the first thing I would be interested in hearing about is, when did your parents first talk to you about how your family was formed? What was that conversation like, and what were some negative and some positive things that you took from that?
Well, when there was always a picture of my birth mother, my surrogate, on my mantle in my bedroom, and so I always knew who she was. And when I was 6, my parents made me a My Family book, and it basically explained in very basic terms, when 2 men love each other, they are gay, that basic. And it talked about how my dad and Pop really wanted children, and the process of insemination, I guess. Probably a little too much detail for a 6-year-old, but better too much than too little, I guess. Or not, I don't know. So they made me this book, and then I read the book, and then I also brought that book with me to my teachers in kindergarten and 1st grade and shared it with them and my classmates. So that was kind of how they opened up to me about that.
For me, I was conceived similar to her. My aunt was my egg donor, and then I was carried by a surrogate. So I'm blood related to both of my dads. And so, I can never remember a time in my life where I didn't know how I was born. My parents just age appropriately, answered all of my questions and my brother's questions. So I kind of always grew up knowing, my parents didn't actually give birth to me, but this nice lady who decided to help out my dads had me and my brother. And so I grew up knowing that, and then as I got older, I started to know exactly more how that process worked and all of that stuff. So I kind of just grew up knowing all of that, and I think that was really a good way to do it.
Yeah, similarly, there's never been a time that I can remember where I didn't know, and IVF is something that's, well, difficult. It's a little bit more appropriate to explain to a child, so my parents were pretty open about it, and I remember conversations as early as 8 or 9 where we'd be sitting at dinner at a restaurant, and my brother and I would say, oh, so why did you do this? Like, why did this happen? And they'd explain to us exactly how we were conceived. And it's interesting because my gestational carrier works with my dad, but our biological mother, my aunt, actually carried my brother. So it's just a little bit different, but it's always been very open discussion. They're never going to not answer a question that we have.
I, similar to them, I can't remember any time where I haven't known. My dad has just always told me. There's always been pictures. He's told me everything. He's been very, very open about everything.
Great. So can you talk a little bit about the conversation that you have with people outside of your family? Maybe people who you have met in passing, or maybe people who you see regularly every day. How have those conversations been when you talk about your family and upbringing?
For me, oftentimes, I found that when I said I had, but it's a little different because I'm also 25. So when I was born, there wasn't anything like in this capacity in terms of a forum where multiple same-sex parents would gather together. So I was usually the first in most of my situations, whether it be like school or an activity. So I would say I have 2 dads, but I found over time that people would assume that that meant that I had parents who were divorced, straight parents who were divorced. So then I just started always saying I have 2 gay dads, just to like clear up any confusion, which, you know, seems obvious now, but it wasn't then. So that's something that like I learned, but I think over time I have the same exact way that I say it, very similar to like how I try. Well, it's, again, like I used to draw a picture actually, like stick figures, like this is all the different moving pieces, because it's really hard without a visual. So now if I meet somebody for the first time, I'll pull up a picture on my phone so I can literally circle and show them who's related to who, because it really helps. Without that, it's just confusing and frustrating for all parties. So
I have that diagram on hand as well.
I've never found like the need for a diagram. I guess that might have been helpful if someone was confused. But whenever like someone would ask me like, so what does your mom do? I'd explain like I have 2 dads who are married to each other, and then they'd say, so are you adopted? I'd say no, and then I'd ask them if they know what surrogacy is, and like 9 times out of 10 they'd say no. So then I'd have to explain that. Like depending on who it is and how old we were, I'd explain it to like varying degrees of detail. But mostly it's been quite simple. No one's ever been like flat out say like, oh, that's gross or anything, or like sit. And if they have more questions, like I'm happy to answer them. And it's mostly just been pretty simple, I guess.
Yeah, I'm very lucky. I live right in the heart of Boston, and it's extremely progressive and liberal, so no one gives you crap for it. But another thing that I get, just people were bringing up responses, is did your mom die? And that's one that's a little bit trickier to handle, but then I just have to tell them, like, no, my mom did not die, and my parents have always been together because my parents were together for years before I was born. And people also have a hard time understanding why I was in my dad's wedding. They don't put together that gay people were not able to be married. Luckily in Massachusetts it was 2004, but still. So it, like Eleanor said, it just depends on the age. In kindergarten, obviously, my explanation was a lot simpler than I give my friends now, but most people are pretty okay with it.
I usually explain to them that I have 2 gay dads and that they were just divorced and now they are with new partners because my parents did get divorced when I was little, and that since they are male, they can't really have a child, and through the process of science, I was created.
So I'd be interested in knowing what advice you would have to anyone sitting here who is looking to start their family. As a child with 2 gay parents who have had their family started this way, what would your advice be to them? What was helpful to you that your parents did when talking about everything?
I think my parents were always obviously very open, even though they could have maybe withheld some of that until I was slightly older, but they've always been very transparent with anything, not like outside of the process of starting a family. They've just always been very open and answered questions, no matter like whether it was appropriate to answer that question or not. So I really appreciated that. I think the biggest advice, because they were very well intended and wanted to make sure I had all the resources necessary to, you know, be in an environment where everybody wasn't like me, but sometimes that backfired and it made me feel like I was the person that wasn't normal and everyone else was. So it was out of love that they wanted me to feel supported, but I sometimes felt weighed down by that support. So I think that's the only thing that, you know, I would suggest, just being transparent and letting your kid tell you what they need and not, you know, jumping the gun, because everybody's different.
I totally agree for the transparency thing. Like, if your kid asks you a question, like, just answer it. Like, take into account their age and their maturity level and all of that. But if they ask you a question, don't, I feel like withholding information or lying or anything like that would just cause more harm than do good. So I really appreciated that my parents always answered my questions, and they also just like explained it very clearly. And like sometimes my brother and I would ask like questions like, so whose tummy did I come out of? And then they had to explain to us like, no, you didn't come out of our bellies. Men can't have babies. And then they proceed to explain like what a surrogate is. And I guess we were, I don't remember who asked it, but we were very young. So like they explained it in very simple terms. So then as we got older, we got more intricate explanations. So I think that keeping the age appropriate thing, as you mentioned, was very important, and the transparency thing was also very important.
Yes, I'll say it again because it's important, be open. Yeah, so that's something that helped me. I don't want to repeat too much of what they said, but another thing that I have to say is don't try to put too much pressure on your kids. No family's perfect, no kid is perfect. Just because science is being involved doesn't mean the kid will be perfect. So you don't have to worry about it. You don't have to prove yourself. Like, no one's gonna say that kid got a bad grade in math because they have two dads. Like, that's not how it works. That is not, people.
I mean, they might say that.
They might say that, but it's not how it works. People with straight parents can get bad grades in math too. Like, don't feel it. Yeah, it's not. Yeah.
Repeating what everybody else has said, be open. It's one of the most important parts of being there for your child. And also be informed, especially if you have a girl, about puberty. And my dad is a registered sex therapist, so he knows a lot about that. And that's actually the hardest thing I have to explain to my friends, that it's not what it sounds like. And like, it's just like really good to be informed, so that way when your kids do ask you those questions about puberty, that you know the answers, and that way you can help explain the answers to them, so that way they know.
I strongly second that.
Can I just add one more thing to that as well? So my dad, one of my dads is a pediatrician, so I had that end covered. But I also have my aunts. So the woman who is my biological mother and her wife, yes, they are lesbian as well. They have been with me my whole life, and they have also been helpful. So if you have a girl, a couple other female influences doesn't hurt, but it's not necessary.
Totally third or fourth that. Strong female figures are so important, whether it's an aunt, a grandmother, or a nanny, which I had, people who are still so significant to me today. So that's just especially important. And I think even if you have a boy, it's just important. I don't think you need to have a mother and a father, obviously, but I strongly feel that you need important, strong female and male figures, regardless of the gender of your child.
Yeah.